Welcome. My name is Joanne Conklin. I'm the director of the Bell Gallery, and it was also my pleasure to curate the exhibition that's currently on view entitled 33 Degrees. Tonight we have the pleasure of having two photographers join us, Camille Seaman and Olaf Otto Becker, both of whose images are on view. And the format of the talks tonight will be each photographer will speak separately, and then they're going to sit up here where we can examine them in depth with some Q&As, and I'll start that and then turn it over to the folks in the audience. Over the past 15 years or so, photographs of polar landscapes and icebergs in particular have cropped up in galleries and art fairs around the world. And for me, I see this as a response to two factors. The first being the opening of these areas to tourism, and the second, the recognition of the impending loss of this essential and somewhat forbidding and beautiful landscape. When I first saw these images 15 years ago, it was really my impression that the iconic quality of the subject matter could overshadow the artist's style or vision. It was hard for me to imagine how you could get past that and have something that was truly your own. But in Camille and Olaf's photographs, I recognized both a strong point of view based on their social and political beliefs, and backed up by formal and stylistic decisions that clearly differentiated the two artists' work. And that was why I invited them. Camille and Olaf also stand out for the depth of their commitment to this subject. Both began photographing polar landscapes in 2003, somewhat coincidentally the same year, and both have spent extensive periods of time returning to those areas. For Camille, that included spending 6 months of the year for a number of years as an expedition photographer, which meant that she sort of shuffled between summers in Greenland and summers in Antarctica, and a few months of the year home with her family. And for Olaf, it translated into numerous arduous independent trips to Greenland, where he explored different areas and aspects of the landscape via his trusty Zodiac or on foot. And so both artists have exhibited widely and recently in a few of the same exhibitions, as the general interest in climate change has grown and exhibitions around that topic are being organized. Camille Seaman's work has been exhibited at numerous museums, including the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, the Whatcombe Museum in Bellingham, Washington, Tufts University Art Galleries in Boston, and the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., among other venues. She's published in numerous magazines, including National Geographic, the New York Times Magazine, Newsweek, Time, Outside, and Camera Arts, among others. And she's received a National Geographic Award in 2006 and a Critical Mass Top Monograph Award in 2007. She studied with Jan Groover at SUNY Purchase and subsequently studied with Steve McCurry and Sebastiano Salgado. Two monographs of her images exist. She published The Last Iceberg in 2008, and the second book called Melting Away, a 10-year journey through our endangered polar regions, was published in 2014. Olaf Otto Becker has worked included in exhibitions also in many museums, at the Reykjavik Museum of Photography, the International Biennial of Photography in Nancy, France, Whatcombe Museum in Bellingham, and in an exhibition called Altered Landscapes, Photographs of a Changing Environment at the Museum of Art in Reno, Nevada, which seems like a strange venue, but they have an excellent environmental studies program there, and they organize many interesting exhibitions about the environment. He was also included in Land Meets Water, which was curated by Peter Galassi, at Archipelage. Olaf has published 5 books on landscape photography, 3 of which include aspects of his work in Greenland, and they are called Broken Line, Above Zero, and Sculptures of Change. And just a note, all of Olaf and Camille's books are on view in the gallery, so you can take a look at those. Olaf has also received numerous photographic awards, including 2 from the Bavarian Journalists Association and one from German Photography Book Prize for his book, Broken Line. So please join me in welcoming Camille Seaman and Olaf Becker.
Good evening. I said, what should I talk about? And she said, well, tell us how you got there. And that's a really long story, so I'm going to start at the very beginning. And I always have to point out that I did not take this picture. But I show it because most of us in this room, this is the first generation to grow up being able to see our planet or know our planet from an external viewpoint. We have an understanding that we are a ball in space, a spaceship Earth. And we take that for granted, this knowing. And if you can imagine, 100 years ago, this view was not possible. And yet for us, it's so easy. We can literally explore the Earth this way. I show this picture because my grandfather, who was a Shinnecock Montaukett native of Long Island, raised us, his grandchildren, to know that we were made of stardust, even before science could say such a thing. We knew this in our bones, that we were made of this light, basically. And so when I talk to students about our heritage and what we come from and what we should aspire to, I like to remind people that these are our ancestors. And like this thing, our purpose, our goal as humans is to expand, evolve, and create. My personal view of cosmic consciousness is very much like an 80s fiber optic lamp, in that I believe that all of us are connected to some sort of source. And each one of us is one of these points of light, an expression of this cosmic consciousness. And as artists, I believe that we are almost cosmic antennas. And we literally listen for signal. It is the artist who says there is a disruption in the field, or there's a gap here, or something that needs to be pointed out or amended, created. And so, oh, is it too dark? Okay. So maybe that will help too. So I like to tell people where I'm from. New York, which is just across the water from here. And you can see the circled area is where my tribe is from. It's the very eastern tip of Long Island. And this is Montauk Point, and this is the Shinnecock area. Shinnecock is actually a bastardization of the word in Algonquin. It's actually Shinneocket. And Shinneocket means people of the level or the flat land. It's very flat there. We probably won't have land there in 25 years. So that's where I grew up. I was named for Hurricane Camille, and I was, I think, a cute baby. I look much the same, I think, I don't know. And this was my grandfather. And at Shinnecock, we're actually matriarchal. And that means the women hold the power. The women are the leaders in the family, and the men all support. And so my grandfather, while he was a huge influence in my life, my Nana held final sway in everything. But he took it very personally. He wanted us to know that we were actually connected and related to everything, interconnected and interrelated. And as a small child, he would take me into the woods and he would have me put my hands on each tree as we walked. And he would say, slow your breathing and listen and feel this tree. Know that this is your relative in the same way that I am your relative, and you must respect it. And like many children, one day he caught me just carelessly pulling leaves off of a branch. And he very gently said, do you think that you're separate from this tree, that you can do what you want without consequence? He said, if you think that you are separate from nature, see how long you can hold your breath. And then he had me there, sit and try and hold my breath. It was a quick lesson. So many of these lessons I had as a young person. Can you see me, camera? Is it too dark? Okay, I'll do that. And is that okay? Is that better?
As long as you can stand.
Yeah, I'm here. So my grandfather had many of these lessons. And one of the most valuable things that he gave me, that all of this I took for granted, I didn't realize that other children weren't raised in the same way that I was. I thought everyone had this knowing. But one of the things that he did from the time that I was about 5 years old until he died when I was 13, every day, didn't matter whether it was raining, snowing, hot, or cold, I was made to sit outside, and I wasn't allowed to move more than the circumference of my arms. And I was made to sit for an hour in the snow watching it fall slowly, and an hour in the summer when it's sweltering heat and watching birds and bees do their things. And after this time sitting, he would call me into the house and he would say, what did you see? And if I was feeling stubborn or belligerent, I would say, Grandpa, I didn't see nothing. And he'd say, go back outside. And so quickly you start to say, well, I saw a spider building a web. And he'd say, well, that means no rain this week. Or I saw a butterfly, no rain today. I saw clouds that had this pattern, rain within 24 hours. He taught me what these things that I was seeing meant, but more importantly, he gave me the practice of being still and observing. I don't know how many of you in your life take the time to be still and observe, but it's like a superpower, because you start to notice things and see things that other people cannot. And so as a person who likes to encourage others, I say start 5 minutes and try it. It will change your life. I was very happy as a child with my tribal family, and we were very poor. We really subsisted off of fishing. If we did not fish, my grandfather would shoot the raccoons or the possums or even sometimes squirrels, and that was our dinner. This was on Long Island in the 70s. This was not some very rural place, but yet we still lived as this small family on an isolated hill in Huntington. And so when he died, the family started to unravel a bit. And at the same time, I realized that I had a gift to draw. And so I auditioned to go to the High School of Music and the Arts in New York City. And this is me at the age of 15, and already you can see I'm playing with cameras. As a small child, I was always given the Kodak 110, you know, this Instamatic thing. And they say, let Camille take the picture because she doesn't cut people's heads off. So I already had a skill. And so in high school, I was really happy to have access to this incredible creative outlet, drawing, painting. And then also, as a student of the school, we were required to go to museums in New York every week. And so things between my mother became untenable. She is a Roman Catholic. She's black and Italian. Her father was an Italian immigrant. Roman Catholic. And until my parents divorced, she did not have much say in my upbringing. And as soon as she did, she said, and I quote, "I'm going to Christianize my heathen half-breed children." And so we were forced to go to church and forced to pray and forced to do these things that, for me, felt so unnatural. And I don't think she quite understood what to do with someone as creative as me. And so, like oil and water, we clashed. And it became a point where I was like, I'm either going to hurt her or me. And neither of those is a good option, so I left. And you can see, this is me standing on this abandoned car. I was not a happy teenager. I'd lost my tribe. And I was hanging out with punk rockers because I was the closest thing to my tribe. And the school recognized that I was at risk of falling through the cracks. And I shared this particular part of the story because you might know someone like me, a teenager who seems a little angry or lost. And I have to tell you, in my case, the camera saved me. It gave me something positive and creative to do in a time when I was very confused and very angry. The school basically gave me a nichromat film camera, taught me how to bulk load black and white film, and said, go out and photograph your experience. They took away the manual. They said you have to figure out how to use it. But these are some of the pictures I made. And like so many of the pictures of my teenage years, the World Trade Center was often in the back. I worked to support myself as a homeless teenager in New York City, sleeping on friends' couches, as a New York City bike messenger, and also in 1-hour photo labs. And so as a New York City bike messenger, I used to deliver packages and parcels to the World Trade Center every day. And I knew that space and those buildings in a very physical way. And that's me as a bike messenger. You can see I was not a happy camper. But with this camera, I at least had a constructive way to put that energy. And my yearbook quote was, "Wow, look at that turtle go." I didn't ever realize how self-aware I was because everything in my life has been at my own pace. And it often felt like I was a little behind the curve, but somehow I would end up out in front. And so if you know a child, a teenager, someone like me, encourage them creatively. It may not be with a camera, but it may be with music or drawing or sports or whatever, but give them a positive and creative outlet. So I'm going to fast forward because there's lots of stories, but really the story tonight is about how did I get to the ice. And unfortunately, I was attacked on a New York City subway train in 1990. And that was so traumatic for me that I had to get out of the city. I knew if I stayed there, I'd become just another angry New Yorker, and that was not an acceptable thing for me. And so I moved to California, the Bay Area, Berkeley to be exact. And the adventures that I had there have been amazing. And if I ever ran into the guy who attacked me on the train, I would probably thank him because that was the sharp left turn the universe gave me to do something that radical, to make that move, and to have the adventures that have led me here to the stage. So something terrible turned into something wonderful. But in 1999, I was doing my traditional beadwork. I thought that was my purpose. I had found this joy of being able to work every day with glass beads or porcupine quills on traditionally brain-tanned smoked leather and making moccasins or dolls or clothing, and I loved it. And I was doing so well with this that I had orders from galleries all over the country. And I was working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week doing it, but it was like a meditation for me. I didn't mind. And then one day I woke up and my hand felt like it was on fire. And I went to the doctor and they said, you have Decrevein's tendinitis. And you have 3 options. You can do cortisone shots, you can rest it, or you can have surgery. And so I chose to try and rest it. And while I was resting it, my boyfriend at the time had to go to LA on a business trip. And he said, why don't you come with me? It was only a 1-hour flight from Oakland to LA. So we're sitting in Oakland Airport, and the airline announces that they've oversold the flight. And for anyone who would like to wait just 1 hour, they would give a free round-trip ticket anywhere they flew. And I was like, well, I don't need to go to LA. I can wait an hour. So I gave up my seat. And if anyone had pulled me aside and said, if you give your seat away, you are going to end up at the ends of the earth, I would never have believed them. But one of the lessons that my grandfather instilled in us was that if a door opens, even if it's not one that you've planned, walk through it, because it might be the door that leads you to your true purpose and your true happiness. And so I walked through that door. This is just a picture of me with some of my moccasins in my moccasin making phase. And so I walked through that door. I gave up my seat, and I ended up choosing to go to a place called Kotzebue, Alaska. And I did this because the airline was Alaska Airlines. And so I did a little bit of research. I knew it would be cold. I actually wanted to go to Kotzebue specifically because it was situated on the supposed Bering Land Bridge. And my tribe, being on the very eastern tip of Long Island, I was curious about what was it that pushed us to walk all the way there if, in fact, we had come across this bridge. And so I was interested in doing a sort of reverse commute. And I had no real intentions of reaching Russia, but I wanted to have a sense of the experience of walking on the frozen sea ice. And so with a little bit of online research, I chose to go in the last week of March, and where the sea ice would still be solid, but there would be sunlight. I went to the local North Face outlet, I bought some warm clothes, I put it in a bag, and off I went. I had a film camera. This was way before digital. This was 1999. And I had that tucked in my coat, and off I went. I made the mistake of checking my bag. And if you've flown Alaska, you know they're notorious for losing your luggage. And so when I arrived in Kotzebue, and I stepped out of the plane onto the stairs, it wasn't even a jetway. This is a tiny little airport. My lungs and nose hairs froze. It's this choking sort of cold that I had never experienced before. It was minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I was like, I better go get my clothes. And I go into the airport, which was basically a Quonset hut, and my bag never arrived. And the local people, the Inupiat people, all worked at this airport, and some women, they were like, oh, your bags didn't show. Don't worry, we got you. And they outfitted me in sealskin hat, parka, gloves, everything that I needed. And they said, when your stuff comes, we'll get it to you. And side note, when my stuff came and I wore it, I froze. I found out early on that traditional fur technology works. And it's thousands of years old, and it's biodegradable. And this Gore-Tex isn't. Just side note. So one day, I was like, okay, today's the day. I'm going to walk out onto the frozen sea ice. And I remember setting out. I had nothing. Only the camera tucked in my parka. I had no water, no food, no shelter. And I just stepped off of the land onto the sea ice. And it was the squeakiest styrofoam feeling. I thought, wow, this is not what I thought it would be. And everything was completely covered because, again, it was minus 30, probably minus 50 with the wind chill. And I just started walking away from the town in the direction of Russia. And as I walked, every 10 feet or so was a twig in the ice. And I thought, oh, there's a path. So I was following this path, and every few minutes, a snowmobile would come up, and they'd be like, are you okay? And I'd say, yeah, I'm just going for a walk. And they'd be like, okay. And so I was like, there's even traffic. This is fine. This is fine. And so I walked and had this traffic for a while, and then I got to an area where the twigs stopped and the traffic stopped, and I kept walking. And I walked for an hour like this, and finally 2 snowmobiles pulled up, a Russian woman and an Inupiat man, and they asked me a different question. They said, where are you going? And I said, I'm trying to get to where the ice ends and the sea begins. And in my mind, my naivete, my stupidity, I literally pictured that it would be a solid piece of ice and then water. And they said, well, that's 22 miles away. And I was like, oh, I can't walk that. And they said, well, we're going that way. They were going ice fishing, but they weren't coming back. And I said, well, I've never been on a snowmobile ride. I remember my grandfather, if a door opens. So I was like, I'll go for a while. I'll just get on for a little while. And so I got on the back with the Inupiat man, and off we went. And it was so exciting. We're zoom, zoom, zoom over this frozen sea ice. And then I was like, oh my God, I had no idea these things go 60 miles an hour. And so we're going 60 miles an hour for several minutes, and I start to do the math, and I'm like, whoa, whoa, stop, because I have to walk this back. And they're like, okay. So they pull over, they let me off, and it was one of the few times I took my camera out and made a picture. And I watched them leave me, and I watched them till they disappeared, like into white, like they just poof. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then I turned to look for the town, and it was gone. All around me, this is the sealskin parka, all around me, in every direction, was just white. And I realized that I was in way over my head, that I was standing on frozen sea ice, that there were polar bears out there, that I could fall through the ice, no one would find me, that there could be a whiteout, the temperature, I had no supplies. And so I decided in that moment it was time to turn around and follow those tracks back before the wind erased them. I walked for over 5 hours before I could see the town again. But as I walked, all of the teachings of my grandfather came flooding to me. I realized for the first time in a very visceral way that I was standing on my rock in space, that this was not some science fiction planet. This was here. It was mine. It was what I was made of, that we are all made of the material of this planet. And we will all return to the material of this planet, that we all are earthlings, and that everything is interconnected and interrelated. I also discovered when I was home that I was actually 2 weeks pregnant with my daughter as I made this walk. So my awakening as an earthling was also in tandem with my awakening as a mother. So then I had a child, a beautiful girl that I named Tala, which in my tribe's language means a female wolf. Be careful what you name your children. And so I remember holding her as I watched the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And I remember as I held her thinking, she will never know these buildings in the way that I had as a bike messenger, except for in a photograph or film. I understood in that moment the importance of a photograph as a historic document, as proof of existence, much the way we have pictures of our grandparents or our ancestors. And that was part of this switch. Before these moments, I didn't think of myself as a photographer. Before these moments, I was quite apathetic. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just wanted to do no harm, do my thing, and have a good life. But something about watching those buildings fall as I held my child awakened me. And the next week or so, when we were bombing, I think they called it, what was it? It was this green night vision bombing that they were doing of Afghanistan. And I was sitting on the comfort of my couch in North Berkeley as I watched this, and I thought, we're going the wrong way. This is so dark. This is so cynical. What can I do to show that there's something beautiful about this life and this planet? And it was like a little light switch flicking on. In that moment, I knew I would use my camera. I was like, I'm going to go document climate change and then I'll change. I had no plan like that. It was just, I will document the events of my life, my experience, to show that there's something beautiful about this life and this planet. And when I came back from that Alaska walk, my mother-in-law, she was like, Camille, you're so intrepid. What an amazing experience. She was curious about this idea that I had met my planet. And so she decided to go on her own at the age of 70 on a Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker to the actual North Pole because she had to go find out for herself. And she had the same exact experience, and when she came back, she was like, I have to write a book about this. And you have to be in this book, and you have to come with me to this place called Svalbard. And I honestly thought that after my Alaska walk, that was it. I had been cold. I don't need to do that again. But she is a very strong woman, and she said, no, you have to come. So as a family, with my 3-year-old daughter at the time, my partner and his mother, we all went to Svalbard. And there, the switch had been on. I took with me 5 different formats of camera. I had a 4x5. I had a Rolleiflex. I had a medium format camera. I had a 35mm camera. And I was going to photograph the heck out of it. What I didn't realize is I would also fall in love with the ice. There we got on a small Norwegian icebreaker. And we entered from Longyearbyen, the town there, open water and headed north. And then I realized how mistaken I was about being able to walk to the edge of the ice in Alaska. Because we had 50 miles of drift ice. And we went through 50 miles of drift ice, bumping up against it, and it was this amazing sensation. Part of your brain is thinking, ship ice, bad. And another part is like, wow. And then we got to about 80 degrees north, and we hit solid pack ice. And there, I don't know if you know this, but the way that an icebreaker works is it actually uses its weight to ride up onto the ice and crush the ice. And so we hit, oops, I'll fix that later. We hit the ice, kind of like that, and nothing, except nothing happened. And so we backed the ship up about a quarter mile. We got up some speed, and we hit it again. Nothing happened. And we went back, and we hit it again, and finally our ship went up onto the ice, and just like a cartoon, it was this beautiful, this crack, and then this big 6-foot pieces of ice going up, and I will show you at the end of this a small film clip, and you'll see some of this ice, and it was just me screaming, woo! It was amazing. And so I was hooked, and I thought, well, if this is the Arctic, oh, there's Tala. What's the Antarctic look like? And so as a thank you to my mother-in-law, we took her to Antarctica. But there in Antarctica, there was no people for me to photograph. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I remember again my grandfather's teachings that we are all related. And so I decided to photograph everything, whether it was a penguin, an iceberg, a rock. It didn't matter what it was, I would photograph it as if I was making a portrait of one of my ancestors. And so those photos were shown to National Geographic editor. One thing led to another. I was asked to be on a Russian expedition in the Arctic, in the Antarctic, and then it got me hired on all these ships as the expedition photographer. And then I became, I like to say I'm bipolar, because I spend my time going between the Arctic and the Antarctic. So a lot of people are always concerned, but as a woman, how could you leave your child? How could you do this as a mother? And the reality is 2 things. I believe that our children don't do what we tell them to do. They do what we show them to do. And I wanted my daughter to have the courage and freedom to pursue whatever it was she wanted to do. And I had to show her by example. So when I could take her with me, I would. And the other part of that is she comes with me. I've traveled with her internationally since she was 2 weeks old. She's been in over 150 countries, all 7 continents, before she was 7. Don't feel bad for her. This was her on the Arctic Ocean in 2003. She turned 5 in Antarctica. And 6, she created a sport called Naked Cliff Diving Barbie Competition, where she had her Barbies diving off of cliffs, and she was building houses for them out of whale bones. It was beautiful. So Tala, and then what's amazing is just last year, she went to work with me in Antarctica as one of the expedition staff. So there she is doing penguin highway patrol in Antarctica. So now I'm going to show just a brief 3-minute summary of my 10 years in the Arctic and Antarctic. Thank you. Olaf?
So, Olaf Otto Becker. For more than 30 years now, landscape photography constitutes the main topic of my photographic work. I'm interested in documenting the visible traces of human overpopulation left behind in nature. It's these traces that make clear how exactly we treat our planet. I usually work a couple of years on one specific topic to then publish my results in form of a book. The single image is of great importance, but it's sequences that allow to tell an in-depth story. I think of myself as artist as well as eyewitness to the changes of our time that are important to me. I read the landscape and record what I find to be truly remarkable. Oops. It doesn't work. Okay. Until today, I've worked on 3 projects in the Arctic. The first one is called Broken Line, and I published also a book named Broken Line. I drove with a small Zodiac boat about 4,000 kilometers along the Greenland coast alone to take photographs of that shore, which will change first because of global warming. The second project I worked on was the series Above Zero. I made 2 expeditions together with an assistant. We walked about 500 kilometers on the ice cap in Greenland to take photographs of rivers and lakes on the ice cap. And the last project I published last November is Illulisat, Sculptures of Change. I just show the beauty of these sculptures created by the nature, the icebergs. These are the 3 books I have already published about my Arctic work, and these 3 books are part of altogether 6 books which I have published, but these 5 books I published with Hadje Kant in Germany. I came for the first time in contact about global warming in 2001 when I visited one glacier again where I took a photograph some years before. And so I asked the people what's happening there, and they said, yeah, it's because of the global warming. The glaciers, they melt away. And I made more investigations about that, and I decided I wanted to go to Greenland and to take photographs of that coast, which will change first because of the global warming. And so I started the project Broken Line. I bought a small Zodiac, I shipped it to Greenland, and I started my trip along the Greenland coast. I started here in Ilulissat, and went all the way here up to Melville Bay until it was not possible anymore for me to go on with my small boat. And you will see it here. So you can imagine that it was challenging to go around this long distance with this boat. But on the other side, I was able to stop everywhere where I wanted to stop, and I was independent because I needed nobody who brought me to a place. I could decide by myself where to go. And I took photographs with an 8x10 camera from the boat and also from the shore. And these are some of the first photographs I made in 2003. And these are photographs I made from the shore. And here are some more. And this is the Ilulissat Glacier, the Ilulissat Fjord. This fjord produces about 45 meters of ice every year. But 20 years ago, the production was 20 meter ice per year. So it speeded up that the ice production at this place. I also took photographs of the houses where the Inuit live. This was always the place. I moved from one Inuit settlement to the next settlement, and I stood there and made my excursions around this area, and then I went on to the next settlement. And everywhere where people are, there's also waste. So you see this, you find this picture also in the exhibition in the gallery. And here's also my boat. I took these photographs in Melville Bay short before I stopped my trip to go farther north because it was so difficult to go with this small boat on. And here you see some impressions how I drive with my boat. Sometimes I drove hours per hours through the fog. And it's a very strange experience when suddenly there is an iceberg. The iceberg comes out of the nothing, and then there's only the encounter you have in this moment, and then after this, the iceberg disappears in the fog, and you will never find it again. And here you see the conditions with the gasoline and the boat and the tripod and so on. And yeah, it was also a great experience for me to be there alone in this remote area. And here you see the camera I used for the photographs. And this is a Google Map photo. And I moved until this place here. And then really it was not possible to go on. And here you see a photograph from this place here. I took it here, just to give an impression about the conditions while I was traveling with the boat. And in 2007 and 2008, I made 2 expeditions on the ice cap. Because when I flew over Greenland, I looked out of the window of the plane and I saw these blue lakes on the ice. I saw the blue rivers on the ice. And so I decided I want to go there and take photographs of these rivers. But it was really challenging to reach these places. This is the surface in summer. It's much easier to go over the ice cap in March when when all the ice is covered by snow. But in August, it's nearly horrible to move there. And George, my assistant, and I, we had to carry about 180 kilo of equipment with us. We need the tent, we need the food for 1 month, and camera and everything. And so we divided the luggage so that everybody of us had to carry 90 kilo of equipment. And we moved in this area where these red zone, this is the melting zone of the ice in summer. So we started here in this area, and I got some satellite photographs from scientists from the Colorado University. And we left the boat here, and then we walked about the mountains here, and then we started our trip to find all these rivers and to see it directly. And so we walked here along, and here along, and here along, and here along, and then we walked back again. And here are some impressions of our trip while we were walking on the ice, taking photographs. And it was so strenuous to carry all the luggage that I lost during 3 weeks 14 kilo of weight. So if somebody has problems with weight, this is the way to lose it. So, but it was, for us, it was really a very intense experience. When you are there, there's no noise. You don't hear anything. You can hear your heartbeat, and you can hear your blood running through your veins. And so it's incredible to find a place with no sound, except if you are close to the rivers, then you hear the river before you see the river. And this is, I made portraits of altogether 4 rivers, and this is River 1. We started here, and I took photographs of a lot of points of this river, and I noted all the points where I have been. And so these are portraits of melting rivers. You find all over on the surface on the ice cap, you find these black holes. So there's a lot of dust and all kind of seeds you can find on the ice. And because the dust is darker than the ice, it warms up more than the ice. And so the dust creates these pools. And the whole surface is completely dotted by these pools. And this is a crevasse. The crevasse opened up, and then also dust laid down here, and so starts a small river and a small creek, and then one creek goes in another creek, and so you get a bigger river. And so there are thousands of rivers like this on the ice cap in summer. And the melting increases year by year. It's very strange when you are there. You can't believe that what you see is really there, because we normally don't have the experience of blue water on the ice, but here you find these incredible landscapes. And all the rivers at the end, they end up in a moulin or in the crevasse. So all the water goes underneath the ice, and at this place the ice had a thickness of about 700 meters. So the water goes down 700 meters here at this place. And some impression of River 2. Altogether, I made portraits of 4 rivers. But you will not see the whole river. You can see it in the book, in the exhibition. And here you see the different levels. During the day, the level of the water is different. So the highest level of water is in the evening between 6 and 8 o'clock. Because during the day, the temperature rises, and in the night the temperature goes deeper. And so this is the reason that at between 6 and 8 o'clock, the most of the melting water fills the river. And in the morning at around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, you have the lowest water level. And here you see also a lot of black dust. And the black dust increases the melting process. And this is a caress. Well, finally, the river 2 ends up. I also visited a scientist camp on the ice cap, Swiss camp. They do research on the ice now for more than 20 years. And the Swiss camp is situated here in this area. I had the occasion to be there 2 weeks, and I needed the 2 weeks because I waited for the right light. And I wanted to take photographs when it's cloudy. And so there were 3 days a whiteout condition. And this was the right condition for me to take the photographs. Because for me it was very strange that scientists with their small measurement tools are able to say something about what is happening. So I had the feeling, even we can measure a lot, we still do not really know what will happen. And this was the reason that I waited for the whiteout for these photographs. And this is the only point on Greenland where where tourists can visit the ice cap. And in summer, hundreds of tourists come to this place, and they spend there 20 minutes, and they have a coffee, and they take photographs of each other, and they try to understand something about the global warming. But it's really difficult to understand. We have no sensors for global warming, so the only way to understand global warming is by measure it, and so the scientists do it for us. And the last book I published about the global warming and the ice in the Arctic is Ilulissat Sculptures of Change. And for me, icebergs are swimming sculptures, witnesses to a global change that, drifting southward on the ocean, slowly dissolve in their mirror image. So for these photographs, I waited for the condition that the sea was calm and that I got the mirror image of the iceberg, and I took photographs just of single icebergs. I just want to show you some of these pictures here. Sometimes you can't believe what you see. These are two icebergs touching. And these are not two icebergs. This is one iceberg, and this iceberg is connected underneath in the water, and the iceberg has two peaks. So I took a photograph of the two peaks. And sometimes I'm impressed just to change a little bit the viewpoint. And it's sometimes strange when I look at something from this side and I go a little bit to the other side, I have a look at the same thing, but for me it sometimes looks very different. Also 2 icebergs touching. It's not a very comfortable place there to take photographs. This is the last picture. So Joanne said to me, I have a limitation of 20 minutes, and so these are the 20 minutes. So, but if you have questions, and we still are here to ask your questions you might have. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Those were very different and both very terrific talks. It was great to hear you talk about your work. So I wanted to start with a couple of questions. And the first is that I know Olaf has said he's not going to go back to Greenland, and Camille hasn't been for a while but is going back. So I wanted to ask you both why you are or are not going back and where you're going from here.
Also, I just wanted to acknowledge that as a woman that works in polar regions, we aren't often invited to things like this, so thank you. It's usually a very male-dominated area. I'm going back because I have a morbid curiosity. It's like some part of me is like, I gotta know, how bad is it? Like, how, and the Greenlandic people are amazing. I felt very at home with them. We did a lot of, because I would make mittens, and they would trade sealskin mittens with me. I have some carvings of whales that they did for me, and so there's a cultural thing that I have with them as well. So I'm just curious, and I miss it. These places get in your blood.
Will you photograph while you're there?
If the light's good. Olaf and I were talking about how we both have had experiences in Greenland where it was just bright blue sky. For me, for 2 months. 2 months, every day, blue sky, and I was like when? So you know, there's not many blue sky images that I'm interested in making.
Yeah, also me. So. Yeah, the reason that I will probably not go back to Greenland is that I say that every time when I come back. And now I have been there already 14 times. But probably I will not return so quickly because there are a lot of other topics I'm interested in. And I think that I found all the pictures I was looking for, and I cannot imagine that I can find something more I want to tell. And I'm curious about a lot of other things and changes of landscape in the world. So we do not have only changes in the Arctic that are visible. We have changes everywhere. We have plastic in the sea. and we have deforestation of primary forests. So I also did one book about the deforestation of primary forests, and I went to Borneo and Sumatra, and I went to places in Australia and so on. And I really was shocked about that, what I saw there, how we change our world because we have a demand on resources, and we really waste resources because we have an overproduction of a lot of things, and so. And I'm concerned about these things. So I think I already, with 3 books, I did a lot of work about the Arctic, and I'm interested to tell other stories. This is the reason I probably will not go back to Greenland. There would be another reason to go back to Greenland. I've never been there with my son, so I would like to show it directly and to drive with him between the icebergs, just to be there with him. But this would be probably, in the moment, the only reason I could find to go back.
I learn a lot about the world through art, and I think it's a great way to introduce people to things. And I know that is what you're trying to do with your photographs, and people come in, and we've just had enormous positive response to the show. Do you think that when people leave, that stays with them and it makes a change, or can you talk about the changes that you've seen happen over the period of time you've been doing this?
The changes in Greenland?
No, in people's reactions to, and does looking at this artwork make a sustained change in people?
I think there is a growing interest, and the interest has been growing since 2003, 4, 5. And so the people are interested to get information, and so they seek for information. So, and they get information about the magazines, they get information about the TV. And so there is also necessary to get information with art or with beautiful pictures or whatever. So to understand something, we have to get information about something. And there is a demand to see what is happening, to understand what is happening, because we cannot feel global warming. And so I think because the interest is growing everywhere in the world, the people want to see something. I would not say that my photographs have changed something. Probably for somebody who saw it for the first time and thought, oh, there's something happening. But a lot of people are communicating about global warming now. And so the more information you get, the more impact you get.
Yes, and I stopped going, completely just stopped. In 2011 was my last time in the Arctic because I was having real anxiety. There were more and more polar bears on the land, and they were, I was on the land, and that particular time I was there, a young British boy was killed by a polar bear, and I never wanted to be the reason that a polar bear be killed. And we were able, with our marine diesel ice-strengthened vessel, to go in open water within 250 nautical miles of the geographic North Pole. And I thought, I was like, I'm just part of the problem. And I spoke a lot publicly, and people would always say, well, what can we do? And I realized like I needed to answer that question for myself, so I just stopped going completely, and I started to answer those questions for myself. And I was away for almost 11 to 17, 6 years, and I wear a lot of silver and greens and blues because I was missing, my house is decorated in these like ice colors, and like I was really missing it, but I also felt like my pictures weren't helping anything. I was just part of the problem. And so I became a TED Fellow and then a Stanford Knight Fellow, trying to figure out different ways, because I was like, I can't blame people for not seeing my photo and be like, wow, I have to change my life. I realized I had to learn different ways of communicating, and it wasn't just going to be with my still images. But that said, you know, I remember seeing my first Edward Bertinsky and being like, I want to make an impact the way that photo just impacted me. I very specifically remember that moment. So I do know that for an individual, if they see an image, I do get people saying to me that they don't see ice the same way anymore. They didn't realize ice could impact them emotionally. And that's I mean, how much more can I ask?
So I'd like to open the floor for questions. If anybody has any, Terry and I will bring you a microphone so you can be heard.
Hi, I have a lot of questions, so you can stop me if I take more than my turn. Olaf, I was curious, in looking at the gallery pictures, particularly the rivers, just amazed that someone could even get there with a camera, let alone an 8x10. But firstly, I was just curious, what was the temperature at that time when you were shooting down into these rivers?
So there's a reason for the name of the series, Above Zero. And we had, most of the time, we had really above zero temperature, Celsius. And we had, even when there was a sunny day, and we were protected by the wind, because there's always wind on the ice cap, because the cold air goes to the sea, and so there's always wind. But if you are protected by the wind and you are in a tent and it's a sunny day, then you get 36 degrees Celsius plus. So this is enough to warm up that you are able to wash yourself in one of these pools after. And so while we were there, we were on one place, we stood with our tent 1 week, because there was always blue sky. And so I waited for the right light, because I did not want to have a blue sky and a blue river. I wanted to have the focus with the color only on the river. And we stood 1 week at this place. At the beginning, we built up our tent, and then at the end, we took off the tent. But the surprising thing was, during 1 week, the tents were about 50 centimeters higher at the end, like at the beginning. Why? The tent protected the ice for melting. So at the beginning, we had our cooking tools in front of the tent. But at the end, it was difficult because everything rolled away from the tent. So 50 centimeters in 1 week, we were surprised. And when you imagine that the ice cap from north to south is 3,000 kilometers, from east to west is about 700 kilometers, and the ice is on top is about 2,000 meters thick. And during 1 week, there are 50 centimeters less ice. and you calculate just the amount of ice that melts away during one day, it's unbelievable. So the most of the time it was really warm there. And we had never really problems because it was cold.
I was curious about the water. I spent some time looking at some of the TED Talks and first found one that Camille had done, and then they kind of lined up on the column on the right side of my computer. So I went down, and there was a very interesting talk by a physicist, and a lot of the things that she said I didn't quite understand, but she said there's evidence that the water in these crevasses actually find them all the way to the bottom.
Yes.
And then comes out and then mixes with the sea, and it does strange stuff because it's so cold. It doesn't really integrate with the regular ocean, and I'm not quite sure what the ramifications were. But did you get a sense talking to scientists there that the rivers that you showed in your pictures, that in fact they were going all the way down, or they were just freezing over again?
So they found out that the water that goes underneath the ice warms up the ice from underneath, and so the glacier, they speed up with their movement, because it's like you put grease on the ground. Yeah. So the ice speeds up with the movement and goes to the sea. So the scientists, they every year they control the measurement stations. They install the measurement stations at a special place, and then the next year when they come again, these measurement stations are 500, 700 meters more close to the sea than they were before. So the movement of this place during 1 year can be up to 1,000 meters per year. So there is a strong movement of ice, and all the measurements the scientists have made until now, they calculate just how much ice is melting because of reducing the ice from the top. But they did not really calculate until now the speeding up of the glaciers. So we have now knowledge about how much ice is melting every year. But we miss still all the calculation caused by the speeding up of the glaciers, how they go into the sea. And I talked, when I was talking about the Ilulissat ice glacier, 20 years ago, the ice had a movement of 20 meters per day. And now it's a movement of 45 meters per day. So that means that double amount of ice is going into the sea every day now than 20 years before. And the scientists still have not calculated this amount into the whole amount they already have calculated. So I was also on expedition with the NASA 3 or 4 years ago. And so in one of the photographs you saw two of the scientists sitting in the snow, and what they were doing is they make a snow profiling. So they measure the weight of the snow every 10 centimeters, and then the higher the weight of the ice is, that means there was a high temperature during that period. And so they make a profiling of the ice. And they compare this profiling with satellite photographs they do. And in the moment, they lost one satellite. So they have to go by plane every summer over the whole ice cap and to do all the measurements of the ice. How many ice will the ice cap lose during 1 year? And they have to do the same in the Antarctica. And so these are the measurements they do now they have been doing now over a period of more than 20 years, and they realized that the melting is increasing again and again, and they are surprised every year about the huge amount they did not expect. So even for the scientists, there's a surprise every year. So now we calculate how long it will take until we will have sea level rise of 20 centimeters or something. But we cannot rely on that. It speeds up so fast during the last 10 years that we will get really a big surprise at the end.
And to answer your question about the icebergs melting into the salt water and the interaction of fresh water into saline water, in a normal melt world, pre-climate change, it was very important that these icebergs be introduced, and they created these upwellings of minerals and nutrients for phytoplankton and krill and marine mammals and the whole chain. You will tend to find a lot of marine mammals around icebergs. But now with this hyper melting, you find huge disruptions. Even here in New England, the lobster, for example, is disrupted, and the fishing is disrupted because there's so much more fresh, cold water being introduced from Newfoundland and coming down this way that it's disrupting local ecosystems because of this imbalance.
Thank you. Someone else?
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your work and your stories. Incredibly powerful. I'm overwhelmed in a really good way by it all, and particularly because I have the good fortune of getting to travel to Svalbard this summer with the Arctic Circle residency as an artist. And so, seeing your work is incredibly inspiring and overwhelming, and also trying to figure out, it's a short period of time. You guys have spent so much time there. It's a landscape that's completely foreign to me. And so I'm curious as to what you would say to somebody as an artist going in to somewhere like that for the first time, and to make the most of that opportunity, so to speak. I know that's maybe a hard question.
Well, I would say if you haven't already paid, just go on your own. The Arctic Circle, I know a lot about that particular residency. I have friends that have done it, and it's a mixed bag. I think it's great to work with other artists in that area, but that's not going to help you as an individual artist there. Svalbard is accessible as an individual, and there are ways to use that money to do it on your own.
Thank you.
Anything more specific you want to know?
No, it was completely open-ended, so.
Okay,
yeah.
Svalbard's amazing. What time of year will it be? June, July?
June.
So you may still have some ice and potential for polar bears, and you'll be surprised at how warm it is. Yeah, it's warmer than you think. But Arctic muck boots, that's my recommendation.
Thank you.
This is for Camille. And Olaf, actually, because you mentioned your son. But for both of you, as your children are growing up, how are you instilling the same values, that same, have you met your planet question? What have you seen? How do you teach your children how to move through the world?
Well, I can tell you, I feel like I've done my daughter a favor, and I've also, in some ways, marked her. She knows what I know. She is in the same community with me. She's been there. And so as an 18-year-old, she has a lot more awareness and knowledge than many other 18-year-olds normally would. And so it has affected her to the point where she's a minimalist. She says she doesn't want to have children. She really is trying to go zero waste. She is dumbfounded by the amount of things that we have that are not recyclable. She doesn't understand because I raised her to not see resources. I raised her to see relatives. And so she doesn't understand why we continue to cut down trees or drill for oil. And it's a heavy thing to put on a child, just when they're supposed to be enjoying life. And so she has a seriousness about her that I'm like, oh my goodness, what have I done? But at the same time, I know that that's part of what might save us, someone like her.
Camille and Olaf, thank you so much. I've been very moved to hear both your approaches or your stories. You know, different voices, but each equally informative. I want to ask Camille, since you photographed animals, and I was interested to hear. I mean, it's depressing, but a little bit of what you have to say about the animals that you've documented, and also the people, the local people. What do they say, or what their experience is?
Well, I don't necessarily see a distinction between us and animals. They're just different kinds of sentient. And so when I'm photographing them, you know, I try to have some empathy about what is their reality. Whether it's a walrus, and they stink. You can smell them before you see them. Or a polar bear. Playing with her cubs, like such an incredible mother, or a starving polar bear, or that polar bear that was up on these rocks where you're like, what are you doing up there, man? Many polar bears that we find dead are dead because they climbed to try and get to birds' eggs because they were hungry and fell. I just recently was in South Georgia in sub-Antarctic waters, and I came across there, thousands of miles from any place, a fur seal that had this fishing net wrapped around her neck as she was trying to nurse her pup. And thank goodness she was able to nurse. We couldn't approach her, it was too dangerous, we didn't have the right tools, but I knew all I could do was make an image of her and try and get that out, to say, we have to wake up people. There is no such thing as a way. And we share this planet with these creatures. If we think that we can live without them, we are mistaken. Watching a polar bear going from nest to nest of these birds that had migrated from Europe to lay just 2 eggs for that season, and have those eggs destroyed, that interrupts a population. And then that population isn't there to eat the insects or whatever, and then the crops have to be sprayed with more pesticides or whatever, but it has reciprocal effect. We need these creatures. We are less without them. Oh, and people, you know, people, because I spend a lot of time working on tourist vessels, I find that there are 2 kinds of tourists specifically that come to Antarctica. And it is the tourist that is curious and wants to see, or it's the tourist that wants to check off their 7th continent. And the ones who want to check off their 7th continent, by the time they get to the 2nd penguin colony, they're like, what are we going to see here? Oh, we're going to see 100,000 Gen 2 penguins. Oh, more penguins? When is there a gift shop? It's like, we're in Antarctica. You know, so there's these 2 kinds of people. And you can only hope that you instill something in them that they will, I know it hurts. That they go home with some impression that they share maybe with their grandchildren, that they went to Antarctica and they saw a penguin. And in Greenland, talking to the Inuit, it's getting more and more dangerous. And there's this mixed bag. There, at the same time, the government of Nuuk is licensing all these areas for gas and mineral exploration. So which way do we go? You know? Anybody else?
Well, that's a rather depressing end.
No, can we end it on some? I would like to. No, can't leave it.
No.
No, because part of what I will share with you what my grandfather shared with me before he died. He died of cancer, but before he died, he called each one of his grandchildren in, and he said these words. He said, "You are billions of years in the making, and you carry each and every one of your ancestors with you, and you can access that wisdom and knowledge at any time. Just call it. There is no one like you, and you were born of this time for this time. You are here in this moment because we need you. We need you to figure out what your special gift is, what it is that makes you happy, gives you joy in the service of each other, because we all live in service to each other. Anything other than that is an illusion. And if you honor this gift and live in service to each other and do what you were meant to do on this planet, even if it's just make pretty pictures, you will have lived a meaningful life, an important life. And so I ask you all to do what it is you were put here to do. Whatever trepidation you've held or felt like, one day I want to do that, today I'm saying, don't wait. We need you now, all hands on deck. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. That was really wonderful. Thanks to both Olaf and